right, so just a couple quick notes for those that aren't aware. We do have a support request form. So right here on the main page, you can click this. It opens up a Google form that Jonah's put together. If you have questions or need some help, we ask that you submit your ticket through this Google form. It does two things when you do that. One, both Jonah and I will get an email. So if one of us is out of the office, the other one knows to help with that answer. So if you call Jonah and he's out, I don't know that you need help. And so you might not get a response for a while. So this will go to both of us. And then we're both aware of you needing help and what kind of question you have. But it also helps us track the kinds of issues you're having to make sure that when we do our trainings, that if there's certain things that need to be addressed in those trainings, that we're doing that so that we can start to minimize the number of those types of support requests that come in. Sometimes it's just nothing you can do, whether it's to delete a work order, those just happen. So, but if there's something that you're just unsure of how to do, we want to make sure that we're addressing those either through trainings or videos or some other manner to try and reduce those kind of issues and questions going forward. So from the main page, there is this support request form. If you do need to contact us, you have our phone numbers here, so you can do that, and it's right there. So with that, let's go ahead and get logged in. And so since Jonah's kind of taken over most of these duties, I'm not sure how familiar you are with, some of you are with some of the tools that are available. So I thought before we went into the Supervisor Portal, we'd go into a couple queries that you can use as tools to help you guys on a daily basis keep track of where things are at, and also to make sure that when you're entering your miles in your vehicle, your lift counts, that there weren't any data entry errors. So we're going to go into the query tab, and we're going to look at a couple queries real quickly there and just familiarize you with those queries and how they can be used. So once you're in the query tab, you're going to go down to the FA equipment section, and sorry, let me get my noises on my phone turned off. And we're going to run the second query here, the current and PM due miles with miles until due. So we'll click that, and that's going to open a new window, or not a new window, but it's going to go to a new screen. And when you come here, the filter that we're going to want to do is your location ID. So every one of you has a unique location ID, and that is what your vendor ID is with NCDOT. So when you become a vendor with NCDOT, you're given this location ID or grantee ID, and we've used that as your location ID in EAM. So everybody should know their location ID. Is there anybody that does not know their location ID?
This is Bruce, and I don't.
Okay, Bruce, let's see.
Bruce, yours is 6116.
There you go. Thank you, Jonah.
Thank you.
I could have gotten there, but not as quickly as Jonah. Anybody else need theirs?
Yep, this is Jessica from Mecklenburg County. I don't know mine.
I don't have yours as on hand.
Okay.
Right. I'll get it. Hold on one second. We'll do this the difficult way. It's not difficult. Just joking. All right, Jessica, your location ID is 28738. You said Mecklenburg, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else?
Hey, this is Radcliffe. What's Dare County?
Dare County.
There is 12437.
Thanks.
And it's a good idea to, either memorize that number or write it down somewhere, because there are some places where you want to use that number, and there are some places where you'll need to use your vehicle abbreviation. So It's just a good idea to have that handy if you need it. Anybody else? Okay. If you don't, let us know, and we can certainly get you that number. So what you'll do is in this drop down, you'll search for your location ID and choose that. Your lifecycle status code ID is going to default to A for active. So anything else really doesn't need to be in there, but just make sure that that's highlighted. Usually you won't need to, but usually in the results drop down here at the top, I will just choose all, and that will refresh and load in all of your vehicles. And so here we see how this is organized. So the first column will be your equipment ID. So this will be all of your active vehicles. The next column is the current mileage on the vehicle. That's labeled the latest meter reading. The next column is the life total. And in most cases, these two numbers should be equal to each other. The only time they wouldn't be is if you reset or replace the odometer. So you always want to kind of check those against each other and make sure that they are equal. Sometimes if you're manually resetting the latest meter reading, you forget to do the life total and it doesn't update. So you just want to make sure that those do in fact match if they should match. The next column is the life meter at last PM. So that's the mileage, the last time the vehicle was serviced. That's followed by the miles since the last PM. When it's due for its next service, the PM due at meter. So that's the mileage that the vehicle is due for its next service. Your PM override. So this is Dare County, and they do all their vehicles at 7,500 miles. And then the last column is how many miles until it's due for its next PM. So as long as you're negative, you know everything is early. If you see positive numbers, you know that you're late, right? And if you're positive and outside your buffer, then you're past due. So for vehicles, everybody gets a buffer. You get either 10% or 500 miles, whichever is greater. So this miles until due does not include that buffer. So for Dare's case, as long as they had everything that was less than positive 750, it might be late, but it's not considered past due in the eyes of NCDOT. So right now, everything looks pretty good for Dare. The other thing you can do here is just quickly check and make sure, you should never have a miles until due that's the negative is greater than your override. So in this case, if you had, minus 10,000 miles or 115,000 miles, that would tell you that there's an issue somewhere in either the current mileage or the last PM mileage. So, I usually recommend that you just check this, a couple times a week and just make sure that everything looks pretty good. Helps you keep track of where things are at and how far away they are. And we'll look at the calendar when we get in the Supervisor Portal, which gives kind of similar information, but it's not as clear maybe if there were some data entry errors. Does anybody have any questions on this query? Does anybody want to see theirs real quickly, or anybody that's not familiar with this query want to see what their system looks like?
Yes, we would for Jackson County, please.
For who, Jackson?
Yeah, for Jackson.
Okay. And you guys are 17637. Yeah, and you can always use update results to refresh it. And so the other thing to keep in mind is if you have an open work order, this will not update until you finish that work order. So for example, here for Jackson, you've got this vehicle 27. So right now it's 134 miles past due. It's late, but it's not past due. But you may have it in the shop and it may be getting serviced right now. So this is not reflective of the actual case. If it is, this is certainly something that you want to make sure that you get in for service soon. All right, anytime you start getting into positives, that's when you can start running into trouble. So we don't recommend that you wait until it's positive. When you get close, you need to start planning accordingly. Make sure that the scheduler knows, that vehicle needs to be out of service on a specific day because it's going in for its PM service. But when you guys start getting into positives, you start running into problems. Other vehicles break down, and then you just can't get this one in for service when you need to, and then next thing you know, it's gone out of compliance for that vehicle. But everything else looks pretty good. So if 27 isn't on the calendar, you'll want to get that on the calendar soon to go in for its next PM service. You guys have any questions about your query, Jackson?
Actually, that 27 just went in for service. I suppose it hadn't been updated yet, so
Yeah.
we should be good with that one. Thank you.
Yep. And yeah, and so that's something you have to keep in mind. So as soon as it comes back and finishes, it'll update and you'll be good to go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else?
Can you show Mecklenburg's?
Definitely. 28738, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all right, and so here you go. So you've got quite a few that are positive, and then you've got quite a few that looks like they're out of compliance. All right, so all of these are past due, and the past due mileage is greater than the allowed buffer.
Okay.
And you guys might be in a little different scenario. I don't know. I know you guys have changed, and things have changed in terms of your relationship with NCDOT. So I don't know, since you're now a full reporter to NTD, I don't know if they have quite the oversight that they did, but it's still a good idea to make sure that, if these have been serviced, that the work orders get entered. Maybe they haven't been entered. But if they haven't, then you want to make sure that they get in for service. The other thing to do is just check, maybe there's an issue with the last PM mileage or the current mileage that's causing these to appear to be past due. So anytime you see this, the first thing you'd want to do is go check your current mileage, the first, second, and third columns, and the fourth column, which is your last PM mileage, and just make sure that those numbers are in fact correct, that represents, in this case, the last time that this vehicle was serviced was actually 30,912 miles.
Okay. Thank you.
And everything else looks pretty good. I don't see any data issues. So your 6,000 is the largest, smallest negative number, however you want to say that. So that's good. That's in line with what you would expect to see.
Jeremy, this is Jessica with Cabrera.
Okay, you want to see yours?
Yes, please.
Okay, you got cut off a little bit there, so I didn't know if you had another question or not. All right, so you're 13950. Okay, and so you've got, the one thing you have to be aware of is you have a couple different PM overrides. You got some that are done every 3,000 miles and some that are done every 5,000 miles. So you got to be a little careful there, but your buffer for both will be 500 miles. So that doesn't really change the buffer. But you do have quite a few that look to be over that 500 mile buffer. So all of these you'll need to get in. If they haven't been serviced, you'll need to get them in soon. And then these couple that are still below that 500 miles, they're going to need to go in soon. So given the number here, you might want to start with these lower ones first, since everything else is already past due, just to make sure that you don't have these anymore go past due.
Okay, thank you.
And again, check the current mileage and life total, make sure that those are good. Again, maybe a work order has been done, maybe it went in for service, but it just wasn't entered into the system. So if you have questions, let Jonah or myself know, and we can certainly, help you figure out how to dig a little deeper into that.
All right, yeah, I think it just hasn't been entered in. Our Vincent is not here right now, so he usually does the entering into everything. So we'll make sure to check and make sure everything is up to standard.
Okay. Okay, I'm assuming that's good. Everybody else is good. So I'll go ahead and move on. So that's the query for your vehicles. We also have a query for your lifts. So those are tracked a little bit differently. And so you got to use a separate query for those. And to find those queries, you're going to go to the query tab. And this time you're going to go down to the PTG section. And you're going to choose one of two queries. So in the PTG section, this is our group here. These are queries that Jonah or I have created. And so the ones you're going to look for are the current and PM due lift cycles with lift cycles until due. So if you have your lift set up as components, you're going to run this first one. If you have your lift set up as meter 2 on the vehicle record, you're going to run the second one here. All right. And we'll go through each of these, try and do these somewhat quickly so that we can get back to Supervisor Portal, make sure we get through that. But this is organized just like the vehicle query. You've got your column that shows your equipment ID. The next two columns will show your current lift cycle count and life total, respectively. Again, just like the vehicle, those two columns should be equal unless you replace the lift counter or reset the lift counter. So it's pretty rare, but it does happen. So it is possible that those numbers might be different. In all likelihood, if they're off by just a handful of cycles, it's probably not been replaced. It's just a data entry error. And then you have your life meter, the last time the lift was serviced, how many lift cycles since that last service, what the lift cycle count is for the next PM service, your PM override. And in this case, everybody's PM override is 750. And for your lifts, there is no buffer. It's a straight 750. So if you're one cycle over, it's considered out of compliance. So you need to make sure that you keep track of that and you don't have a buffer to work with. And that's an ADA requirement. So that's not a DOT requirement. And then the last column is how many lift cycles until it's due for its next service. And just like the vehicles, as long as you're negative, you're good to go. But as soon as you start approaching zero, you're going to want to start planning to, get that vehicle in for service so the lift can be serviced, or get the vehicle in so the lift can be serviced. And just to the nature of the limited time, I'm just going to kind of leave it there unless people have questions about this query. And I'll show the other one real quickly. It's organized. The filter is just a little bit different here. You've got your drop down for your location ID, your active life cycle status, and your manufacturer ID is the BRAU, the BRAU. So that just limits the types of components to your lift components. So you don't have radios or cameras showing up in this screen. So again, this query is for those that have their lifts set up as components. So they have a separate record and they have their own PM schedule that they operate off of. Okay, any questions about this query for those that have their lifts as components? Okay, so let me just show you the one for those that have meter 2. Go back down to the PTG section and we'll run the lifts as meter 2. And just like the other one, you've got your location ID, your life cycle status code, and then for your meter 2 type, and I chose one that obviously doesn't have it, you're going to have lift cycle or none. And so you want to choose lift cycle as your meter 2 type. And then this will limit the vehicles that show up down here to only those that have a lift cycle for meter 2 that's tracked on the meter 2 of the vehicle record. And again, this time you have your equipment ID of the vehicle. You've got your current lift cycle count, your life total, lift cycle count the last time it was serviced, how many lift cycles since the last service, when it's due for its next one, your override, and then how many lift cycles are you away from the next service. Okay, so again, I just wanted to kind of quickly show this for those that weren't familiar with these two queries. I do think they're useful to help you, again, just track, keep an eye on how far away you are, and also just make sure that you don't have any data entry errors that have been put in when you're doing your daily mileages or lift cycle counts. Thank you, Jonah. Appreciate your help getting started. Jonah, before you leave, I don't know if I caught you. When I end this, is the recording going to save to my computer, or did you have it save up to the cloud? Is it gone? It's gone. All right. I guess we'll never know. Okay. Any questions before we get into the reason we're here today, which is the Supervisor Portal? Any questions about these two queries? And Elizabeth, I see you here. Welcome. Good morning. Anybody else join us late? Just want to make sure we get you on our list. Okay, I guess there's no questions, so let's go ahead and jump into the Supervisor Portal. So we're going to start here, and we're going to do this from the live site to start, but then we'll jump into the test site, and I'll get you guys the link to the test site, put it in the chat, and you guys can kind of go there as well and log in. I hope everybody's got a login for that. I hope Jonah set all that up, but we'll see. So when you come into the Supervisor Portal, your current working location ID will default to you guys, since that's all you have access to. In this section here where you've got all these buttons, this will give you an idea of where your work orders are.
Yeah, I got a phone call early this morning about that, got an email.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning. So you have pending SRs, which are service requests. We don't really deal too much with those. Pending would be your pending work orders. And we'll see how those get created shortly. And then you have open work orders. So these are work orders for vehicles that are in the process of being serviced or repaired. And then you have finished work orders. So the vehicle has had its service done or the repair is done and it's come back and the work's been finished. So the only thing left here to do would be to enter your commercial work. If you do, that's your invoice, your charges, and then close it out. So typically you don't want to leave these in work finished status. This isn't the final status. You'd want to close these out. And then once you do that, they will disappear from the Supervisor Portal. So I can't remember somebody's here from Iredell. Is that Bruce?
Bruce and Rel.
So you guys, you want to check and see what's going on with these, if these just haven't been completed or if you're waiting for invoices or what's going on. So normally the next step would be to close these out and have them out of here.
What if we have them, but we don't have the invoice because
So again, so if you're still waiting on the invoice, then that's fine. It didn't know if that was the case with you or not. So if that's what you're waiting on, then that's fine. So once they come in, you enter those in and then close them out. Yeah, that's okay.
No, someone had worked here before that was doing that, and we can't find the invoices on those. So what will we do about that?
I guess that's up to you. So if you can't find the invoices, do you guys have, are your services done in county or are they done with an outside contractor?
County.
So, and your county doesn't have the invoices?
I inquired her about it and she sent over to me what she had. And I closed some of them out, but the rest of them, some of the other ones that's not closed out, she don't have the invoice for them.
I mean, if she doesn't have the invoice for them, I guess I would say just close them out and get them out of there and then just kind of start going forward where making sure you get the invoice and then close it out at that time. But at some point, these need to be kind of finished up and closed out. So I would say just go ahead and close them out at this point.
Okay.
If for some reason you find them, we can always go back, put it back into finished status and enter the invoices at that time. So I don't know if you want to make a list of those work orders just in case you happen upon those invoices at some point. So you can do that if you want to get that in there. But just keep in mind that you'll have, this number of work orders without any sort of commercial work tagged to them. If you guys are running any sort of, financial audit reports or anything like that out of EAM.
Okay.
It would be real nice if the county garage used the same system as we did.
Certainly, yeah, but even that doesn't necessarily guarantee. So we've got one county where they've been using this because it's required as you know as a recipient, a state recipient, and the county decided to get EAM software as well, but they didn't link them up, so they still have to enter everything twice, and they're not linked. So even that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be, you know, kind of what you want from that type of scenario. But they should have done that. They just didn't do that for whatever reason. But it's, you know, it's certainly, if your county's interested, let me know. I can get them into touch with people at EAM, and they can look into, you know, what it would cost to get the software. But we do have a couple cases where that has happened, where the transit system has had it, and the county has decided to switch from what they were using and actually use the EAM because they saw the benefit of it as well. So that does happen.
I'm pretty comfortable they're not willing to change.
Yeah, it's yeah. I'm not surprised, but yeah, that's that's unfortunate. Although, I mean, they probably had it before you had yours, so that's, I don't know that I would necessarily blame them for not wanting to do that. Okay, and then so the next thing I want to do is go into the calendar. So the queries I showed you are kind of one way that you can help you plan for when vehicles are coming due. But that only tells you kind of right now what the current status of where things are, right? How far away you are at the moment from needing a service, or if you're actually past due. So we have a tool in here that will actually project forward into the future how far away you are and what type of services are going to be required or needed to be done in the next 30 days, 6 days, whatever time frame you set. So from the Supervisor Portal, the main Supervisor Portal screen here, we're going to go into this View Calendar screen in the action section. And from here at the bottom, there's a Service Inspection Due button. So we'll press that. And that's going to take us into this Services and Inspections Due. So what I recommend from here is that you first define a filter. So there's a Define Filter button at the bottom. You can choose your days, the number of days to project. I usually leave this as 30. The farther out you project, the less accurate those numbers are going to be. So I certainly would do at least a 30-day. If you want to know, say, 60 days, 90 days, you can create additional filters to do that. But this will tell you, at least in the next 30 days, what's planned on coming due. And down here in your check boxes, so I would uncheck Exclude Services on Pending or Open Work Orders, and then check the box that says Include Services to be soon due by meter. All right. And then you can give this filter a name. I moved it. So down here, so this would be something like 30 days until due. And so this kind of scenario, if you did, 6 months or 90 days, you could just change that and save it, and then run that and just have an idea of what's coming due in that specific time frame. And then hit the Save button, and that will give that filter a name. So the next time you come in here, you don't have to go in and do all this stuff. You just choose that filter from the drop-down. And we're going to go ahead and apply the filter. And so this is going to forecast or project what's coming due based on historical information. So, if you're doing your mileages on a daily basis, it's going to look out in 30 days and say, well, using that historical daily average, and we'll go to the next 30 days, how many things are going to be coming due or past due. And so you get this list of equipment IDs here. This column, and some of you might not see this on your screen, you might have to scroll to the right. There is a work order is open column. So that will tell you whether or not you've got a work order for that service already open. And you can move these columns around. So if it's all the way over here to the right, just scroll to the right, click, and drag this column back to the left and move it to where you can see it in a more obvious place. And then you've got your reason due column. So we have some things that are due because of the date, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then you've got some that are due because of a projected override. And so this is where the forecasting comes in. So it's looking at a historical daily mileage, and it's saying in the next 30 days, we're forecasting based on the historical average that you will need to have this vehicle serviced at some point, right? So it's not saying exactly when in those 30 days, but in the next 30 days, it will need to be done based on your historical daily average. Now that's what determines your compliance. So you can see the task or job code. So this is an A, but you have to be careful because it could be a lift component. So this has a -L in it. But if it's an A service, a PM service, the date isn't what drives compliance. So the fact that this is coming due by date doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get that in for service as soon as possible. All right, so we can see that technically this is saying it's 14 days past due. So if it's in red, it's saying it's late. But what we care about is the meter one, and that's the mileage or the lift cycle count. And so that this is still 230 lift cycles away indicates that you don't have to get this in as soon as the day's reason due might indicate. And so the reason for this is there's a setting when you do a PM service, it updates when the vehicle is due or the lift is due by calculated meter, but there's also a date that's associated with it. So it could be every 5,000 miles or 12 months. So that's kind of the typical default. So if you happen to go more than 12 months before you hit 5,000 miles, the days will show up as your reason due. But just remember, what drives your compliance is your projected override, your mileage or your lift cycle count. So really what you want to look at is the meter one, later, early column. And I would probably sort this in ascending order. And see, so the nearest one that's coming due is a lift. It's still 191 cycles away, which is quite a bit for a lift. So, nothing is coming due too quickly. If we get to a vehicle, so here's a vehicle. This is ICAPS 25. So this vehicle is 317 miles away currently from basically the break-even point, whatever your PM override is. Again, this does not take into consideration the buffer that you get for the vehicles. So where the planning comes in is if you to say, this vehicle does on average 200 miles a day, you basically know you've got like 2 days, a day and a half before you've got to get that in for service. And so that helps you plan accordingly. Again, let your scheduler know that 25 is going to be unavailable on Friday because it needs to go in for PM service. Up here, you can see where you've got your meter one. These are all 0. So these are all camera safety inspections. So these are all things that are done by time. They have no mileage associated with them. They're strictly inspections. So that's why they show up here. And these are things that you would want to look at. Your reason due is the date. It's not going to have a projected override because there is no meter associated with that type of service. Any questions on how to interpret this calendar, what this calendar is telling you?
Now, when I do the lift services, I also do the cam safes and stuff at the same time. So a lot of them is coming up saying that the cam safe is late.
Well, so your camera safeties are things that are done by time. So the one thing you might need to do is go into your inspections on the vehicle and see when the next due date is. So a camera safety is generally done, I think it's every 90 days. So the safety inspection, the camera safety is a little weird because you're combining 2 different types of inspections onto a single one. So a safety inspection is supposed to be done every 90 days, whereas the camera inspection only needs to be done every 6 months. So depending on how your inspection is set up, I know some of them were set up where it kind of splits them into 2 groups. One is the safety, and it says to be done every 90 days. And then the second one is the camera, which says to do only every 6 months. And so you can just kind of skip the camera part if you want. But you might want to check your next due dates, because it's possible that maybe you got behind on those. I'm not saying you, but maybe before you came online, things were behind. And the way inspections are set up, it's not based on when it's performed. It's based on when it was scheduled to be done. So if you missed a service, the next one that's done, we'll just update it to the 90 days from when it was supposed to be done, not from 90 days to when it was actually done. I don't know if that makes sense. So if you had, for example, say you had a service that was due in January of this year, and you didn't do it in January, and you were supposed to be done again in April, but you did the one in April, it's going to still update it to say it's due in April, not June or July.
So I should just have a separate sheet for my cam safes.
Well, I mean, I would go in and check your inspections and make sure that they're set up correctly to reflect the actual next due date.
Okay.
And if you do one, they should, assuming your lift cycle counts are probably not done as frequently as the safety needs to be done, I'm assuming. And that may be what's going on. You're not hitting your 750 cycles in 3 months, right?
Right.
So you may need to change how frequently you're actually doing your safeties. And I know that, unfortunately, that means your vehicle's going in for service more often. But the DOT, the safety inspection, is a DOT requirement, and is supposed to be done every 90 days.
Okay.
So you might need to just do that separately and take that in for the safety inspection every 90 days, and then say every 6 months do your lift and your camera. Or, whenever it goes in for the lift, do the camera at that time.
Okay.
So think about that, and maybe, kind of track how things have been going. But that may be what's going on, is that since your safety needs to be done more frequently than your lifts are being serviced, that's why it's showing up as past due.
All right, thanks.
Jeremy, you keep saying safety. Is that the lift inspection that's supposed to be done every 90 days? No,
that's just a vehicle safety inspection. Things like that checks your emergency exits, your hatches, make sure you have pathogen and toolbox on the vehicle, and that's filled and things like that.
Okay, now that's new to me. I was never told that. Is there somewhere that we're supposed to be doing that?
Generally it's added as an inspection, and it's to be done every 90 days. So every vehicle should go through that. We probably need to check with DOT and see if they've got an updated checklist for that. But there is a default kind of set of tasks associated with the safety inspection. So, if you add that in there, it will show up and just have a default set of tasks. I know in teaching this class in the past that some of the things that were on that checklist weren't applicable to everybody. So it may be that it needs to be adjusted for you. And what is applicable to, what you've got on your vehicle.
Okay, is that in EAM? Is that something like we do every time we do a PM or a lift inspection? Is there a form in this program for that?
There is, yeah. It has its own checklist. So it's similar to the vehicle PM. You could, if you wanted to, add it to your vehicle PMs and just have those things done every time the vehicle goes in for service. But that's a bit more frequently than it probably needs to be done. But you could certainly do that if you wanted. But you would need to make sure that you add those tasks to the end of your PM checklist.
Okay. Thank you.
And if you want help with that, hold on. If you want help with that, just let Jonah or myself know, and we can certainly work with you to set it up however you want it set up.
I will definitely be letting you know. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Jeremy, I have what I think is the latest from the DOT vehicle inspection sheet. If you'd like me to send that to you, I can.
Yeah, send it to myself and Jonah, and we'll take a look at it, because maybe we need to update what we've got on the safety, because that was set up several years ago now, so they may have changed things. So we want to make sure that we've got that matching what they're requiring of you guys.
They've been at home with nothing to do, so they may very well have.
Well, I mean, Kevin's on that, so he's on top of things now. So I think there's definitely changes there that he is implementing and going through that hadn't been done in a while. So I think he's on top of things, and so I wouldn't be surprised that he's gone through that and made that update. And maybe Joan has been aware of it. Like I said, I don't work as much in the support of this as he does. He's kind of taking this over. So there may be conversations he's had with Kevin that he is aware of, but I've just not been privy to. But yeah, if you want to forward that to us, we'll certainly take a look at it and make sure that we get that updated. And we'll have to figure out if we need to notify everybody. We probably will, but let us take a look at that and see how that matches what we've got in there right now. Thank you. Okay, any other questions about the calendar? So one of the nice things about the calendar is it's one way that you can open a work order. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the test site, and we're actually going to do this for real. So I'm going to send you guys a link in the chat. Send this to everyone. And some of you may have this, I don't know. But if you don't, there is now a link in the chat. And can you guys see the test site where it says test site not used for live data?
I can't.
Okay. Now you have to be careful when you're in here. And I recommend that if you're going into the test site that you close out your live site, because it's very easy to forget where you're at. Although the main page here has these big red letters and clearly things to look out for, once you get into any other screen, it looks exactly like the live site. There's no way, it doesn't differentiate from the live site in any way, right? So once you leave this home tab, this looks just like the regular site. So you don't know unless you're looking up at this URL that you're actually in the test site. So I just recommend that you be careful and just close out the live site so that you're not going back and forth. I've caught myself where I've had both open and I'm doing something in the test site, somebody calls and has a question, I forget I'm in the test site, and I'm going and pulling up their data from the test site, and they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's not right. And I'm like, oh, right, yeah, I'm in the wrong place. So just be careful and just be aware of where you are. The test site is a nice place because you can go there and you can do work orders, you can enter data, you can play around on the screen, you can do whatever you want, and it's not going to affect your actual data. You do have your data in here. The test site does get refreshed every 3 to 6 months with data from the production site. So depending on when the last refresh was, it may be a bit out of date. So again, something to keep in mind, if you're in here entering a work order and a vehicle says it's at this mileage and it's not, it's because it could be just really old data. So just a couple of things to be aware of when you're in the test site. So we're going to go ahead and go in here, and I'm just going to pick random county, and we're going to go into the calendar, and I'm going to show you one way. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to open a work order, but this is the first way. And so from the calendar, I'm going to choose my filter, and it's going to load in work orders that are coming due in the next 30 days. And what you can do here is you can check this box over in the left-hand column, and it's going to highlight that row in orange. And you can check multiple boxes. All right. You can check all boxes if you want. I don't know that you want to really open 37 work orders. I probably wouldn't recommend that. But when you check a box, you can then do what's called here, generate work orders, right? And what this is going to do is this is going to move it into, I believe, unless things have changed, into a pending work order. And so when you do that, it's going to default the PM service to an A. It's going to use today's date as the open date. It's going to use the current mileage as the mileage. So everything's going to be pre-populated onto that work order. Right, so it's kind of nice when you do that because you don't have to go through the manual process of entering all that information in there. So depending on how you open your work orders, this might be a good way to do it. If you're doing your work orders in advance, you can come in here, put them into pending status. When the vehicle's ready to go in for service, move it to open, and you're good to go. If you're doing it after the fact, it's probably better just manually do it and put in what the mileage was at the time of the service. Okay, so we see here that we've got a successful update. And so we go back and go back to the main site again. All right, so we now see in pending, we have 2 pending work orders. All right, so this is where it moved that work order. We're going to go into those pending work orders. And we're going to find them. And I guess I created 2. Maybe I did open 2. I didn't realize it. But there were 2. So we'll go into one of them. And before you can do anything, you have to move this vehicle or this work order into open status. So you can't do anything until that's been done. So we're going to go into the work order main screen. And so I call this the work order main screen. Up at the top, this is titled here, work order main. And this is basically the launch pad for where you'll do everything you need to from here within the Supervisor Portal. And down here, so they've moved it. So down here at the bottom is a button that says open work order. All right, and so we want to make sure we press this button, and it's going to move that work order from pending status. You can see here the job status is pending, and it now says open. Okay, so now we can go ahead and do everything we need to do. Typically, the first thing you'll do is print a work order. So you want to print that out, and you have to print it at some point, right? You can either do it when it comes back, after you've entered your commercial work, after the tasks have been signed off. Doesn't really matter, but it's usually a good idea to print it out and send it in with the vehicle if that's how you do things, so that the mechanic knows what type of PM service you're asking them to do and what type of tasks are associated with that specific PM service. Right. So on this work order, we can see here we've got all of our kind of general information. We've got and can you guys see this work order? I don't know if it shared that part of it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it was sharing correctly. And then, so this will tell you the type of PM service or the type of service that's being requested. Here's some messages that are associated with it. So it's coming due at $37,677 for service A. And if we scroll down, this is where you'll start to see all the tasks that are associated with, in this case, an A service. All right, and so if you print this out, send it to the mechanic, he can check these off as failed, not applicable, or completed. And then you can enter those correspondingly into EAM when it comes back. So this is one way to ensure that they're doing what you're asking them to do as part of this specific PM service. In a lot of cases, these have been set up a while ago. And this is based on what we've typically based this on is what your mechanic recommends, what type of services or what type of tasks are associated with an A service or a B service or C or whatever you do. So if there's changes that need to be made to these PM services, let us know, and we can certainly add or remove tasks as appropriate for your system. The state does not require these specific set of tasks to be done on an A service, a B service, a C service. That's typically been left up to you guys and your mechanics to go with their recommendations of the types of services and also, how frequently they are serviced. So, if you choose to do them every 10,000 miles, and that's what your mechanic recommends, then that's fine. With the synthetic oils today, that seems to be the typical thing, especially with, regular cars, maybe not with transit vehicles. But that's usually been left up to you guys. So you want to print this out, and you can do that with the 2 PDF, and it'll save it to a PDF or this little printer icon, and then you can print it out and put it in the vehicle and send it over with the vehicle when it goes in for service. All right, so that's typically what's done first. Not always, but that's typically the order that you want to go in. Okay, so any questions so far? So you've done that. So the vehicle's gone in for service. It's come back. Now it's time to finish and close the work order. So before that, a couple of things need to be aware of. You'll notice here in a PM service, you've got this yellow oil can. So before you can finish a work order, we have to change this oil can from yellow to blue. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. And I'll show you each way. And you are welcome to choose whichever method you seem to think easiest. You seem to think is easiest for you. It's not a right or wrong. It's just a personal preference that you have. So the first way is directly in or from the work order main screen. You can click on the yellow oil can. And when you do that, it's going to bring up all those tasks we just saw on that printed work order. And so you can go down and in each of these boxes, type J. Scott or copy and paste J. Scott, whatever. Oops. That didn't work. Right. And so, if you've got a lot of tasks, that's kind of a tedious process. That's not too bad, but we've got some people that, they've got a couple hundred tasks that are done on a PM service, and to do the copy paste or whatever seems a little annoying. So that is one way that you can sign off your tasks. And if you do that, you'd want to go through and put your initials, your username, and this is usually what you log in with to EAM as the technician. You can see here that we do have the failed column and the not applicable column. So you can check those accordingly. You can add comments. So if the technician put comments on the work order, you can enter those over here. And once you get all those in there, you'll hit the save and you go back and you'll see that your oil can has turned blue. So that is one way that you can sign off those tasks. The other way is through what's called the PM checklist sign-off screen. And to get there, we're going to go up to our screens, and it's this little icon here above the trapeze logo. And we're going to open our enterprise portal. And if you've never been there, you're going to have to search for this screen. And so in the search box, you'll type PM checklist, and you'll see under shop activity an option for PM checklist sign off. And so we'll choose that. It's going to open a new window, and it's going to make it so I can't grab it. So maximize. Oh, come on. And so once you get that window open, what I usually recommend is that you move this or resize it if you need to, because we're going to need some information from this window here. And specifically, we're going to need this work order ID and these three numbers that make up your work order ID. And so within this work order ID, those three numbers are, the first one is your location ID. So again, that's what we referenced earlier. So that's your unique 4 or 5-digit number. The second number is the fiscal year of the work order. So this says 2021. We changed the fiscal year on July 1st. So every work order you're doing now will have 2022 in it. And then the third number is the actual work order number for the fiscal year that's defined here. And so we'll use each of those three numbers. So from the PM checklist sign off, we'll go into the search, and we'll take each of those three numbers and enter them into the corresponding cells from the filter dialog. So we'll put in our location ID, our work order year, and our work order number. And once you get those three numbers in there, hit the apply filter, and it's going to load in that specific work order. All right, so we can see, excuse me, Guilford 1971. and down here it'll say PM service A. And so from here, we're going to hit the edit button to unlock it. And there are two cells that we need to enter data into. And it's these two blue cells you see that just popped up here. The first one is asking for a completion code. And so if you hit this drop down to the right of that field there, you'll see a set of completion or work accomplished codes. And generally, what most people choose is 06 or 07. Doesn't really matter. The only thing I recommend is that you just choose one and be consistent. You either inspect or you lubricate. But again, it doesn't really matter which one you can choose. You can choose repair it if you wanted to, but you're not really repairing for a PM service. So I'm going to choose inspect. And then the next field, it's asking for the employee ID to assign to each of those tasks. And so in this case, you'll use your username, what you log into this software with, and you'll enter that in there. Whatever you do for this one, do not hit this drop down because it's going to load in every single username in the software. And so you're going to have to then scroll through that or start over. If you want to use this drop down, which is fine, start typing your username and then hit that drop down. And it's going to limit whatever shows up in this drop down to what you've typed in that field. So you can see here I type JS, hit the drop down, and everything that shows up starts with JS. And so it's going to limit the options to those usernames or IDs. And this is the case for any sort of field where there is a drop down. We usually don't recommend that you click this drop down without typing anything in here because it's going to list everything in the software from that table or that field's data. So get your username in there. And once you get those two things in there, you'll go ahead and hit the save button. And what that's going to do is that's going to assign a completion code to every single task in this work order. And you can see now every record here has a 06 in it. And if we scroll to the right a little bit, we'll find our employee ID column, and we'll see that J. Scott has been assigned to all those tasks as well. All right, so we've gone ahead and signed off all those tasks. Any questions about this PM checklist sign off before I go back to the previous screen? Okay, so we've done that. So I come back here and I'm going to hit the back button. And in this case, it's going to lose unsaved changes. That's okay. But what we're going to see now is we've turned that oil can from yellow to blue. All right, so I ended up signing, I started the process through the oil can, but I ended up actually signing them off using the PM checklist sign off screen. Either way you want to do it, again, it's completely up to you. The PM checklist sign off is a little easier, but it's a couple extra steps to get to that screen. Usually I would say if you're doing a single work order, it's probably not a big deal to just go directly into the oil can. But if you're signing off a bunch of work orders at once, it might be easier to go into the PM checklist sign off and then just one by one, just go right through those. Load it in, enter your completion code, your username, hit save. Load in the next one and just go through that process. Because that's going to be much simpler than going into every single work order and then copying and pasting your username. But again, completely up to you, personal preference type of thing. And I'll show you at the end of here, at the end of the class today, where there's some videos, and one of them I think Joan has done the PM checklist sign off. So if you need a refresher on that, you can watch that video to go back through that process. He walks you through that process again. So if you need a refresher, you can go back to that and see how that's done. Any questions on signing off tasks? Any other questions at the moment? Okay. Okay, so one of the other things you can do is you can also add tasks to a work order. One thing you have to be careful of when you open a work order through the calendar, it's going to assign the appropriate job type. And you can see here up in the header part, you've got job type PM. When we're done with this work order, I'm going to show you how to manually open a work order. And you need to make sure you choose the appropriate job type when you're going through opening a work order in that manner. And the reason is you can add repair tasks to a PM work order, but you cannot add PM tasks to a repair work order. So the way the software works, if you add PM tasks to a repair work order, it's not going to trigger the right events to ensure that everything gets updated and it captures that a PM's been done. So it's this job type that the software looks for this PM and says, all right, I see PM, I got to do these types of things with this information. So you can go ahead and add repair tasks to this type of work order. You can even add other PMs to this type of work order. So if a vehicle's going in for an A, and it happens to be at the same time that the annual inspections do, you can go ahead and add that annual inspection to this work order. You don't necessarily need to do two separate work orders. I would say unless it's a different mechanic or a different outfit that's doing that work. So if you're sending the PM service to vendor A and the annual to vendor B, I would probably do two separate work orders in that scenario. But if you want to add a task, you can do that by coming down here under the tasks section and pressing the new task button. And this will open up an add work order tasks window. And so you've got a couple different choices here. You can add repair tasks. You can add PM services. You can add inspections, standard jobs, which we don't really use. I wouldn't do anything with that. Or you can do a task search. So under the repair tasks, we've got this group of here of what we call repair task groups. And so under each group will be a list of specific tasks. And in some cases, there might be just a couple tasks available. So here, body and instrumentation, there's just two. Whereas in HVAC, we've got a whole slew of repair tasks that are available. If you're doing something body and instrumentation related, generally you just choose diagnosis. And in the notes, you can make a comment about the type of work that was performed. If it's something that's done on a regular basis, let us know. We can certainly add those repair tasks for you. A lot of these are defaults that were entered when the software was set up. And we've added some over the years. But if you need something specific that's not in here, that you want to clearly define the type of work that's being done in the specific task ID and description, we're more than happy to do that. We just need to know essentially what group you want it to go into and what you want the task repair description to be. And so in each of these repair groups, there'll be repair tasks. And so you find your repair group, and within there, you can click on the task and it'll add it down into the pending tasks section. And so you can add multiple repairs at once if you want. And so this could be a scenario where maybe it went into the shop and they were doing a PM, and while it was there, they noticed that something needed to be repaired and they did it. And so it came back, and so they need to add these tasks after the fact. Or it could be that it's going in for PM service and you've noticed that the tires also need to be replaced. So you can add that task to the PM work order and have those done when it goes in for service. So once you get your tasks on here, and if you add a PM service, I mentioned you can do an annual. That's an inspection. So here's an annual inspection or a camera inspection. So you can choose those and add those to this PM as well. You hit the save button. And so now you've got 3 tasks that are showing up here. And if we go back to the work order main screen, we'll now see that we have those 3 tasks showing up in the tasks section. Okay. Any questions on adding a task?
Okay, I have a question, please.
Yeah.
You said you cannot add a PM to a repair work order,
That's right.
but you can add a repair to a PM, or have I got that backwards?
Nope, you got it right.
Okay, just wanted to check. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, so yeah, you got it right. It's a little confusing, but the thing you have to know is if you're doing a PM service, you have to make sure that the job type says PM. If it doesn't say PM, it's not going to work correctly. The software's not going to track that a PM was actually done. And so it's going to look like it's late, even though you did the service and did the work order. just wasn't done correctly. So it won't trigger updates to specific cells that will reflect that the PM's been done and when the next one needs to be done. So you just got to be careful. And I'll show you when we go into a manual how to choose that way, right? So
Okay,
by default, the calendar chooses that for you. But I'll show you when we do a manual work order how to ensure that you're choosing the right type of job type when you go to open that work order.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So I showed you how to add a add a repair task. It'd probably be good to know how to remove a repair task. So say, for example, you accidentally added the wrong one, or you had a task added to the work order before it went in, and the mechanic looked at it and said there's no issue, so there was no repair that needs to be done. Or for any other reason, you need to have a specific task removed from the work order. You can do that by going into the View Edit Detail. Here in the Action section, there's a button in the middle column at the top. And that will take you to a new screen. And from that screen, there's a column of buttons over here on the right-hand side. And at the bottom is a button called labeled Work Order Tasks. If we click that button, brings in here, it shows your tasks that are currently assigned to the work order. And the left-hand column is a delete column. It's a checkbox. So we can go ahead and check a box next to the task or tasks if you want to remove multiple ones from the work order. Hit the save. It says there's no labor there. It's fine. We're removing it. Right? And so now we have two tasks. And so we'll go back. And back again to the work order main. And so we see now we are down to just those two tasks. Okay. So that's how you can remove a task. So you know how to add a task and you know how to remove tasks from a work order. So when you open a repair work order, there's not going to be any tasks that are assigned to it because it doesn't know what type of task. You're going to have to add those manually yourself. So you'll go through that process through the new task. When it's a PM, it's going to default and add the appropriate PM service that you've chosen at the time of opening the work order. I want to mention another thing from the View Edit Detail screen. If for some reason you have to change the mileage, so say you open this work order earlier than it actually went in, or you mistyped the mileage on the work order, you can always change that. You want to make sure that mileage reflects when the vehicle actually went in for service, not necessarily when this work order was opened. So, if you were opening the work order after the service has been done, that vehicle's been driven since it went in for service. So you want to make sure this mileage reflects the vehicle mileage at the time of service. So you can do that by clicking on the Edit Basic Info button in this column, just a few buttons down. And that will take you to this screen where you can go to the meter one and you can change that value. And you want to make sure, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the manual work order, but for your validation, make sure you're choosing update transaction only, right? And that's for all PM work orders. And then you hit the save button and we'll see that it's going to go ahead and change that work order mileage to 35 to 34. Okay, so now it's got the correct mileage associated with this specific work order. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So the next thing we need to do is we've signed off our tasks for the PM service. This repair task also needs to be signed off. So you'll notice here in this WAC column, where WAC stands for Work Accomplished Code, we need to have a code in the task corresponding to the task, this task ID 15-002. And so we can add that by clicking on the task ID. And you'll see here is a teal cell. So this is requiring a value. You can click this button with the ellipses, and it's going to open up a set of WACs. And so generally for repairs, it's just going to be 004 repaired. You might be cases where you choose adjust, but all this other stuff probably won't apply for a repair. So we enter our work accomplished code. We'll hit the save button. And now we come back and we'll see that that task now has a WAC associated with it. Okay, so at this time, if you track your commercial work, you're going to want to enter those that information into the work order. Is there anybody here that does not track commercial work? And so by commercial work, I mean track the costs associated with the work being done on the vehicle. Does everybody track commercial work?
We do.
Because it's just a slightly different process that you go through if you don't do it. So that's why I'm trying to figure out if I need to show how to do it without entering the commercial work.
I'll try it.
Okay, so I'm going to assume everybody does. So we'll go ahead and go through that process. If you don't, let me know, and you can kind of basically you just skip this next step. All right, so in the action section, there's a commercial work button. And there's a couple different ways to enter this, but we're going to do it from this screen. We're going to click on the commercial work. It's going to open up your post work order commercial work screen. And so from here, you're going to go ahead and enter the costs associated with the services or tasks that have been added to this work order. If you get an invoice where they've split out your tasks by, or your costs by task, you can assign those by task. So in the task ID, there's a button with an ellipses, and you'll see you have the two tasks showing up. So if they've given you the breakdown of cost for the PM service versus cost for the steering column and support service or repair, you can choose the task ID and then enter your costs associated with that service. You add to your WAC, which should match what you put in before for the PM service. Your vendor ID. So everybody should have vendors set up, and their vendors should start with your abbreviation. Basically, it matches what your vehicles are set up as. There we go. And so when you do that, you type GIL or whatever your abbreviation is, hit the all vendors, and it will show you all the vendors that start with whatever your abbreviation is. And so when you set up new vendors, you want to make sure you do that because it'll group them together and it'll be easier to find your specific vendors. It also helps us differentiate, say, advanced auto parts in one county versus an advanced auto parts in a different county, because everybody's got, their own multiple groups of advanced auto parts. And so the one you have is different than the ones that somebody else may have. So you always want to make sure that when you do set up a vendor that you do abbreviate it with your system abbreviation followed by some way to identify who that vendor is. So you choose your vendor. The date will default to today. You can leave that or you can update it. So if this was done last week, you can go ahead and change that or whatever. Your labor costs. So this will be how much the labor was, how much your parts were. If you're taxed, usually that's just put on the miscellaneous cost. And then you can do a vendor invoice. So you've got an invoice back and there's an invoice number on there. And this is a good way to ensure that, these two pieces of information are kind of tied together. So generally you would take that invoice and staple it to your printed work order. And so then they would be connected in that way and file that away. But if they got separated, this would be one way that you can go back and find that vendor invoice. So maybe you have a pile of work orders and a pile of invoices and you need to figure out what's what. This would help you get that done much more quickly. Excuse me. And so once you get that information in, you'll hit the add button. And it's going to put it down in the pending commercial work section. And you want to make sure before you save that you go through your labor costs, part costs, and miscellaneous costs, and make sure that those match and add up to the right number. If they don't, and you save it, we've got to go back and reverse those. And I'll show you how to do that, but it's just an extra step that you have to take. If you catch it here, you can hit this pencil icon. It'll open this up and it'll allow you to edit your commercial posting, and you can go ahead and make changes. And so we change that from 209 to 219, hit the update, and go ahead and it will update the costs associated with that specific PM service or specific task ID. And then we can go ahead and add the costs for the other task. And this would be repaired. And choose our vendor. I don't have any idea what the cost would be associated with any of this. All right, and so you can go ahead and add that. And so now you've got both your task IDs showing down here and the costs associated with each of them. And if everything's good, you'll hit the save button. Any questions before I do that? Okay, so we'll hit the save. And it's going to process. You get the successful update. And so now we've added the commercial work to this work order. And so we can see that if we go to postings. So this will be, you'll see here now that we've got our two tasks here. All right, so we've got our steering column and support and our PM service A and the breakdown of costs and the total cost for each of those tasks. If you do need to make a change, you can do that from here. So from the postings, you'll hit this pencil icon and it's going to open up the edit commercial work. And so this is going to be just like we saw. So you can either edit directly in here and save, or if you need to, you can do a full reversal, which will zero that out and you can start over. If you do a reversal, so maybe I accidentally hit an extra zero, I'll hit a save. What this software does is it actually creates a reversal for you, which is kind of funny. So it reverses everything that you had put in there, puts all the negatives in there, and then it enters a new record in with all of the correct values. Okay, so then we've got all of our commercial work in here. Now, in some cases, there might be a delay from when the work is finished to when you get the invoice. So what I recommend is if there is that delay, don't leave the work order in open status. Generally, I move the status of the work order with where the vehicle's at. So if the work's been finished and you haven't gotten the invoice, I go ahead and move that work order into finished status. And you can do that. And then once the invoice comes in, go ahead and add it at that time and then close it after you've added the invoice. And the reason for that is if you don't move it into finished status, it's not going to update the mileage associated with this PM service. So if you run that query I showed you at the beginning of class, it's always going to look like you're behind because that vehicle is now back out on the road. And so it's always going to look like it's overdue, even though it's not. So once you finish the work order, it's going to update the class PM mileage. And so now you'd be set back to zero relative to your override, and it's going to start accumulating relative to when the next PM service is actually due. So if you don't have commercial work yet, or you don't do it at all, you can just go into finish work order. And it's going to ask you for a date and time finished. And so you can choose that and you can go ahead and finish. We're in, of course. So we're in the test site. There's no calendar generated here, so it's not going to allow me to finish that. But normally you would be able to do that from the live site. Or you can just hit close work order, and it's going to ask you for a date and time finished and a date and time closed. And you can change those. You just can't have the close date earlier than the finish date. and then you can hit close work order. It's not going to allow me to do it because there's no calendar. But you would do that and then close that work order out, and it would disappear from the supervisor portal, right? So it's going to be stuck in open right here as part of this group. But if we'd gone through that, this would be one less here, and it wouldn't show up. Okay, any questions on any part of that process, from the calendar to the opening the work order from pending status, signing off your tasks, adding tasks, removing tasks, printing the work order, commercial work, any part of that process that any of you have questions about?
Yeah, and commercial works.
Yep.
Can you pull that screen back up again?
Sure. Yep. Let's go in here. Okay.
Now, like when I sometimes somebody will forget to put the work task in there. So when I get to commercial works and I go try to go up in that corner and push new task, it usually don't let me put no task in there.
I'm at where you see a new task.
If you go to the other screen where you are putting the numbers in the cost and all that.
Oh, you mean from postings?
Yeah, when you scroll up, we see commercial, then right next to commercial, it says new task.
And so you come in here and you can't add a new task?
Yeah, it won't let me add nothing.
Just added it here.
Yeah, no, but it won't let me do it on my end.
I don't know why that would be any different. So who am I speaking with? Who's speaking?
This rel. Iredell County.
Oh, all right, we're in there. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to go in here and so this is the live side. I'm going to add a task and we'll make sure we remove it. But I just want to see if we can do that here. And because this will tell me if it's something with the live site or if it's something with your account, maybe that doesn't, I don't know why that would be the case, but so let's see, we're going to postings. And so you come down here, you press new task.
Mm-hmm.
And save. Yeah, it worked here. Do you want to try doing that on your end and see, make sure you follow all those steps?
Yeah.
And while he's doing that, does anybody else have any questions? And I might be able to get you to share your screen if you're still having that issue and to see what's going on.
But see, it might be because normally I don't go to postings. Once I finish a work order, then it'll take me to where I got to do the commercial stuff.
Oh, so you're adding a task after the work order's been finished.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't think you can do that. I think you have to reopen the work order and then add the task at that time.
Okay. All right.
So I think when you go into a finished work order, let me see if I can find one. And there should be one or two on yours. So if we go into, go into a finished work order and there was a task that you needed to add, down here at the bottom, there's a reopen work order button. I think you'll need to add that because the work order has been finished. You can't do any more tasks as it's been finished. So let me see if that's the case. Let me try and add a work order here or task.
Yep, that's what I get.
Yeah. So what you need to do is press this button to reopen the work order.
Okay.
And then you can add the task, and then you have to go back and finish it again, and then close it if you need to, or wait until the invoice comes in.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's what's going on. Okay, any other questions? No questions? This is all clear? You guys are all good? Okay. I'm going to show you another way to open a work order. So I'm going to show you a couple ways. There are actually many ways to open work orders. And so there's not necessarily a right or wrong way. So I've showed you one through the calendar where you can put the work order into pending status from the calendar and then move it from pending status into open status. So that is one way to open a work order. I'm going to show you another way, and you might still do it a third way. And I know a system that does it a fourth way. So there are many ways to open it and go through this process. Not necessarily right or wrong. Again, personal preference. As we saw with the PM checklist sign off, that's not a right or wrong way to do it. It's just how you prefer to do it. And you might be more comfortable with how you've been doing it than how I'm showing it. And hopefully I haven't totally screwed you up in that regard. But just keep in mind that as long as you've been doing everything correctly and DOT is happy with what you're doing, the method that you do to open your work order and go through that process is perfectly fine if it doesn't match, one of the two ways that I'm showing you today. We got no, Blondell, I can't hear you. So yeah, so Blondell's asking, in the commercial work, there's a miscellaneous field. So generally, the miscellaneous field is used to hold the tax. I know we have an option where we can add taxes in there and check a box and have it applied automatically, but things can vary by county and it just becomes a mess to set all that up. So generally the tax would go into the miscellaneous field, or you can just add it directly into the parts or labor costs if you want. I know in some cases, I don't think it's split out from the parts and labor, but if it is, again, it generally just goes into the miscellaneous cell. Okay, so we're going to go another way to open a work order. And we're going to do that from the equipment management section. You can go in through work order management, but this is the way I'm going to do it. And we'll open one with Guilford again. See if I remember how to do this. So you type in your abbreviation. So that's your vehicle abbreviation. And you're going to hit the button with the ellipses. And that's going to open up a screen that says choose an asset. And you'll see all of your assets in here. So this is Guilford. They've got lifts. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Let me go back. So they have lifts with the -L at the end, and then the vehicles. All right, so if you have your lift set up as components, they'll show up in here as well. You might have them just labeled a little differently. Generally, we go -L at the end or -L in the middle. And it just, however you want it organized, essentially in your CA portal, and they can be changed if you want. So you go through this list, find the vehicle that you want to open a work order for, and it's going to bring you to this current pending work. And down here at the bottom, you'll see an option here. So this is where you're going to choose the type of work order that you want to open. So whether that's a new PM work order or a new repair work order. All right, so this is where you have to be careful in that next step to make sure that you have the right job type that's going to be assigned to it. And we're going to do a new PM work order. And it's going to come into here, and this is where we're going to start assigning information to this work order. So this part that we're doing now, this is all done when you open a work order from the calendar, right? The job type's done automatically. The meter one, which we're going to put in here, is done automatically. The repair reason ID, the work class, all that stuff is automated through the calendar. This does give you a little bit more freedom to enter information. And so that's one reason why this might be a preferred method for you versus the calendar. If you're opening a work order, a lot of times in the messages, there'll be a note about, a specific type of PM service that's coming due, whether it's an annual inspection or a safety inspection or an A service and how far away you are from an A service. And that will help you determine the type of service that you want to open. And we'll get to that in a second. So we're going to go ahead and enter our meter 1. And we'll see up here in the top part, this shows you the current mileage that's associated with this vehicle. And again, this is the test site. So nobody hears from Guilford, but that's out of date. But we'll go ahead and put in the current mileage. And that's when it's going to be going in for service. For meter 1 validation, there are 4 choices to choose from in this dropdown. I know it looks like 3, but if you leave this blank, it's going to validate your mileage here against the current mileage. And as long as it's within the edit range that's set up on the vehicle, and that's conversation for another day, as long as it's within that edit range, it's going to go ahead and update the current mileage of the vehicle as well as the class PM mileage. You could choose to update the equipment record. If you had a mileage in here, and regardless of whether or not that was within the edit range or not, it's going to go ahead and change the current mileage to that value. So if you accidentally added an extra 0, so if this was supposed to be 69,412, and you actually entered 694,120, it's going to automatically change your current mileage to this value here. All right. The next validation type is update transaction only. So it's not going to touch your current mileage. It's only going to update your class PM mileage. Right. And then the final option is update transaction only on fail. So it's going to try and validate this mileage. If it's a valid mileage that's within the edit range, it's going to update your current mileage and your class PM mileage. What we recommend is everybody choose update transaction only. Everybody should be entering daily mileages or lift cycle counts, or at least 2 to 3 times a week through the CA portal or your external fuel ticket screen. So we don't really need the work order to also update that mileage, and it just reduces the possibility for data entry errors. So this is only going to update your class PM mileage, and your vehicle mileage, your current mileage, and lift cycle counts when you're doing a work order for the lifts will be handled through, again, the CA portal or the external fuel ticket screen. Any questions on the validation type? Okay. So, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, when I do my updates, when my work orders come in, I go into the screens section and I update the class PM. So because if I do this update transaction only after I do a PM, will that automatically update that so I don't have to go into that screen and do that?
Yeah, you shouldn't be going into the screens and doing that at all.
Okay, that was the way I was, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, only if there was an error made when you open this work order. If you ended up finishing it with the wrong mileage and it updated that information incorrectly, then you would need to manually fix that. But yeah, you should not be updating the class PM mileage manually at all. This whole process, the whole work order process will do that for you.
Makes my life easier. Thank you.
Yep. And it probably reduces any sort of issues that are showing up on your, because it's updating it as well when you're closing out this work order. So if you're manually changing it and it's updating it, it could be doing weird things. So yeah, this work orders process will do that for you.
Thank you, man. This would have been nice to have known a year and a half ago.
I'm sorry you've been having to do that for a year and a half.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Okay, so then we need to choose our repair reason ID, and we'll hit this button with the ellipses, and you'll see a whole group of choices for your repair reasons. We'll hit the next button, and since these are PMs, we'll go down to PM and choose preventive maintenance. And then you also have a work class you have to define. Generally, if it's a PM, the work class would be scheduled. If it's a repair, it would be non-scheduled. Although you wouldn't choose that for, you would, but that's how we define those different types of work classes. So since we're doing a PM, we'll choose scheduled. One other thing you have to be aware of, the PM service here, the software makes an assumption on the type of PM service it thinks you're intending to open. And that assumption is based on what is coming due soonest by time or most past due by time. So a lot of times the default PM service you'll see is an annual inspection, or if you have safety inspections that are done more frequently, that'll be the default PM service. So then you don't want to just go right down and hit save because it could be opening the wrong PM service. And if that happens, you can let us know, submit a support ticket. And one of the options is to have us delete a work order, and we can do that for you. But just be aware that that assumption is being made. And you can change this PM service by deleting out the value that's showing here. Hit this button here, and this will give you the list of available PM services. So you can choose the appropriate one for this specific PM work order. Your date and time in, so it's going to default, and this varies by system. The date and time in and due. The date and time in doesn't vary. That's the current date and time, but the date and time due will vary depending on back-end parameters. It doesn't really matter what that date and time due is, but it could be anywhere from the date and time matching the date and time in to 24 hours after the date and time due by default. In either case, you can change those times or dates, and actually this is the date, 24 hours. You can just click the calendar icon here and change those accordingly if you want. And then once you get to this point, that's essentially all you need to do to open a work order. And so we'll go ahead and hit the save button. I'm in the test site, right? Yep, okay, good. And it's going to take us to our work order history. We'll hit the continue button, and it's going to take us to our work order main screen. And this is exactly where we were when we were working on the work order that I created through the calendar that was originally in pending. All right, so we're back where we were earlier. We've got our oil can that's yellow. We know we have to turn that blue. You can print your work order, sign off your task, do all that stuff that we already went through in that other scenario. So again, once you get to this point, everything's the same. And if you open your work order differently from the two methods I showed you, you at some point get to here, unless you're with a specific county that I'm not going to mention, you get to this point and then everything is the same from here on out, from here to the end. So it's just that beginning part of getting to this stage where you have the work order in open status that might be a little different in the steps that you follow. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about opening that work order? Does anybody have concerns about how they're doing opening their work orders? I mean, I don't think you should, but I just want to make sure if you do have questions or concerns about what you're doing, make sure you feel comfortable that you're doing things correctly. Again, it's not a right or wrong issue, but it's personal preference. If we go back to our supervisor main tab, we'll see here, right now we've got 8. Originally we had 7, we had 6, and then we did the one through the calendar, which made it 7, and the one we just opened now made it 8. And so there's 41. I just saw it. There's 41. That's the one we just opened. Okay, so there's those two methods. One automates kind of that process, and the other is a manual entry. Any questions about either of those or any other part of the supervisor portal? Maybe it's something I didn't cover that you had a question about that you've used or have seen. In the helpful documents, so I mentioned the videos. So we have our set of quick reference videos here. And Jonah's been great. He's put these together. And here is the PM checklist sign off the quick way. So again, if you need a refresher on how to do that or something else related to the software, we have these videos here, and I highly recommend that you check those out. If you still have questions, by all means, contact us and let us know. But these are a pretty good resource where he walks you through visually whatever aspect is associated here, entering a new vehicle. He goes through that whole process from beginning to end and shows you how to enter a new vehicle and everything that needs to be put in the specific places. So these have been great, and he set these up. We have some quick reference guides. In some cases, these are for an older version. So some of the icons are a little bit different, but the steps you would follow are the same. And then we have training manuals. But these videos, these are all pretty recent and with the current version appearance. So that would be a great place to start if you have questions about those. And we're always working on adding more, as time allows, for some of the more common questions we get. This goes back to, kind of that issue with submitting a support form, letting us know, where you guys might need additional help, whether it's a video that we can create that can walk you through that, or in our trainings to make sure that we're touching on those specific subjects to ensure that you're understanding how to do that process. Okay, any questions? Let's see, we got one in the chat. So what do you do when you close out a PM work order and find out? So Tanya, if you find out that you closed the vehicle, closed the work order, and you had accidentally opened it on the wrong vehicle, you have to contact Joan or myself, and we'll delete it for you. And then you'll have to just reopen another one. There'll be some additional information we might need to make sure that we set that. So when you close that vehicle out, it's going to update the class PM mileage. So we have to make sure we go back and change that to what it should be so that you don't miss a work order and things like that. But you can submit a ticket and you'll need to provide the work order ID to us, and we'll go ahead and delete that and get everything set back up the way it needs to be, back to what it was prior to closing it, and then just open another work order with the correct vehicle.
Is there any reason why we can't delete a work order?
It's just, it's the way things have always been kind of set up, where we just kind of had that control at our admin level. It's just the way things have been.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure why you'd want to watch this video again, Radcliffe, but I think Jonah will post it to the website or something. I'm not exactly sure where it will be, but he'll send out a message either with a link to it or where it's posted. Don't go away. I have one last little thing for you guys. So I have a poll here. Jonah put this together. So let's see if I did all right in today's session. So I'm going to launch this poll. If you could take a few minutes, well, it doesn't have to be a few minutes, but go through this poll. So it just launched. You should see it. And answer those questions, and then we'll make sure that everybody's kind of, if there was any confusion, we'll address those concerns. Okay, I think almost everybody's gone through it. If not, I think other people may have had the same issue. So we'll go ahead and quickly go through this, and then I'll get you guys out of here, maybe just a minute or two past 12. But so the first question in the poll was, where in the Supervisor Portal are you able to see your upcoming services that are coming due? And you could choose from work finish status, equipment management, work order management, and view calendar. And the correct response is view calendar. So that was the majority of people that responded to that. Work order management was another choice. That does not tell you when services are coming due, but that is just one way that you can open the work order. So the calendar is where you can go in and forecast into the future, 30 days, 60 days, and whatnot to find out what services are coming due in that time frame. So the correct answer was view calendar. The second question was, how many ways to open a work order did we go over? And so technically I went over 2, but there are multiple ways. There are more ways to open it. So I did one through the calendar, and I did a second one through equipment management. But that doesn't mean that there are only 2 ways to do that. So those are just the 2 ways I went through. And then third question was, can you add PM tasks to a repair work order? And the answer is no, you cannot. You can add repair tasks to a PM work order, but not the other way around. So remember, PM work orders, you have to have the job type has to be PM. If it's a repair work order, it's not going to update your class PM information correctly. So make sure that your PM tasks are only on a PM work order. Question 4 says, what mileage do you enter into a work order? And the choices were any mileage you like. Thankfully, nobody said that. The second choice was the mileage on the day the work order is opened. And then the third choice is the mileage on the invoice. And really, there should be a fourth choice here, and that would be the mileage that the vehicle goes in for service. You have to be careful. So the majority of people said the mileage the day the work order is opened. And you have to be careful on when you're opening that work order relative to when the vehicle is actually going in for service, right? So you could open a work order today, but if the work order doesn't actually go, or the vehicle doesn't go in for service until Friday, the vehicle could be used between now and then, and that mileage is going to change. So it's really the time that it goes in for service, which should match what's on the invoice. And DOT, when they're doing site visits, they're pulling work orders and they're looking at the mileage on the invoice and the mileage on the work order. And they're making sure that those are, if not equal, very close to each other. So out of these choices, the correct one should be the mileage on the invoice, just because the day you open it could be after the fact or it could be early, right? Some people open the work order after the vehicles come back. And so you certainly wouldn't want to put the mileage at that time because the vehicle's been driven since it went in. So you got to be a little careful there. Depending on when you open it, that could be the correct choice, but that would not be the default choice for everybody. Does anybody have any questions on that? Since that kind of tricked people up a little bit. Okay. Question 5, which 2 values do you need to fill out the PM checklist sign-off screen? Excuse me. You could choose PM service for each unassigned task, completion code for each unassigned task, email address, or employee ID for each unassigned task. And the correct choices were number 2, the completion code, and number 4, the employee ID. So a number of people put PM service for each unassigned task, but the PM service is what you're signing off. So that's going to be the top task of the task to sign off. And so what you need is the completion code. Remember the column I showed you after we signed that off showed the 06 for every task, which is the work accomplished code. And then the employee ID shows who signed off those tasks. Question 6, which of the following is not a work order status? And you had a choice of open, pending, work finished, or retired. And everybody correctly chose retired. Good job. Question 7, can you still access a closed work order? So there's, so let's say yes. I mean, you can still access it, not from the supervisor screen. So if you know a little trick, then you can access it. But once you close a work order, it leaves the supervisor screen and you can no longer see it from there. So if you're going to access it, you got to go somewhere else to find it. So in that sense, yes. But really, I think what we're getting at is if you need to go back into a work order that's been closed, let us know, Jonah or myself. We'll put it back into finished status for you, and then you can access it from the Supervisor Portal and make any changes or updates that you need to at that time. And then last question, question 8, can you still add commercial work to a work order that has been finished, work finished status? And the correct answer is yes. So you can finish a work order. Remember I said you can, if there's a delay from getting the invoice to, from when the work is finished to getting the invoice, to still move the work order into work finished status and leave it there until the invoice comes in, and then you can add it at that time. And you would add it through the commercial button where I showed you how to reverse those charges or make changes. It would be that same screen that you see there. So you can, from work finished status, go ahead and add your commercial work at that time. If it's closed, you can't, but again, we can put it back in work finished status and you can add the commercial work from that screen. Does anybody have any questions about the poll?
No.
Does anybody that may have answered incorrectly understand what the correct answer is and why they were wrong and how they answered it? I don't want to be mean in that regard. I'm not trying to be mean or anything like that, but I just want to make sure that you guys, if you answered incorrectly, understand the correct answer and why the correct answer is what it is. Okay, I think I got 2 quick chat questions. Nope, that's not it. Norma, your user ID. Yeah, submit a support request ticket, or send an email to me, because I don't know if there's an option to do that for the test site, and we can go ahead and get you set up an account on the test site. And if anybody else wants to get into the test site and doesn't have an account, again, just send me an email and I will set up access for you. Again, be careful if you're in the test site versus the live site. Make sure that you close the live site out and you're just in the test site. But then you got to make sure that you close that one out to go back into the live site so you're not actually putting live data in. Just be aware of where you're at, because it's easy to get lost in which screen you are and where you're entering that information. Okay, any other questions? No? Okay. That's all I have. So I apologize. I took you almost 10 minutes overdue. If you do have questions down the road, let us know. We're here. We're here to help whatever you need to ensure that you're doing your job efficiently and correctly. That's why Jonah and I are here. So let us know how we can help. If there's additional trainings you need beyond the supervisor, this is the one we've kind of been focusing on providing, because this is really the biggest part of the software. That's not to say that there aren't other parts that you do on a daily basis, but let us know if you do need trainings for other aspects of the software, and we can certainly think about how to put those together into an hour or 2 hour session like we did today. But with that, that's all I have. I appreciate your time. I hope everybody's doing well and stay safe, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.